Shri Balabadi Shaki Jai. सभी वैष्णवों को जय श्री कृष्ण, जय जय श्री राधे, 84 वैष्णवों की जय. Today is day 30 of the recitation of the 84 वैष्णवों की Varta in English on behalf of the Vraja Kishori Seva Trust. We are in the story of Dinker Seth Kshatri, Part 1. Dinkar was very attached to divine discourses. Sri Acharyaji used to give such speeches in Adel. One day, Dinker Sethji went to the banks of river Yamuna to prepare some cooked offerings. He bathed and then mixed flour and water into a dough, which he was just about to cook into the hot cow dung ashes to cook when, at that very moment, one of Sri Acharyaji's water carriers came there. Dinkar asked him what Sri Acharyaji was doing. The water carrier replied that he had just opened up his book and was about to commence the discourse. Immediately, Dinkar jumped up and ate the raw dough before running off to listen. After the discourse was over, the water carrier told Sri Acharyaji what Dinkar had done. Sri Acharyaji asked him why he had eaten without offering. Dinkar Das replied that he could eat any time, but that he did not want to miss his speeches. If I had done the offering, he said, I would have missed it. Sri Acharyaji appreciated Dinkarji's sentiment, but told him to make sure in future to always make the offerings correctly and only then to take the prasad. Sri Acharyaji reassured him that he would only start the discourse when he was ready and made Dinkar into his chief listener. Dinkar cooked earlier after that, so Sri Mahaprabhuji would not have to wait for him at all. On any day when he was a little late, Sri Mahaprabhuji waited for him to arrive. Bhav Prakash, the inner meaning. It is a massive misdoing to leave food uncooked and not offer it. However, Sri Acharyaji knew he only did it in his anxiety to hear the Lord's stories, so this time it was not counted as an offence. If one has full faith in Sri Acharyaji, then such things might not be counted as offensive. Dinkar listened to Sri Acharyaji's discourses for as long as he lived. Day and night he remained absorbed in the Lord's pastimes. Sri Swaminiji used to chat to him. Thus he realised his true form through listening to the nectarian words of instruction. Dinkar was such an accomplished devotee. The principle here is that a Vaishnava should always make their offerings to the Lord before going to listen to discourses. In his Bhakti Vardhani treatise, Sri Acharyaji has clarified that one should do Seva before Katha, listening to the accounts of the Lord's pastimes. One should do both, however, in order to develop strong attachment to the beloveds. Dinkar was attached to them in this way, and he soon returned to the eternal Leela. Thus concludes Varta 18, the story of Dinker Seth, although truly there is no end to this story. Varta 19, the story of Dinker Das and Mukundas, two artisans who came from the land of Malava. So Varta 18 was Dinker Seth Kshatri from Prayag, and now we have Dinker Das and Mukundas, two artisans who came from the land of Malava. Bhav Prakash. These two are Sri Nandaraji's brothers in the eternal Leela. Dinker Das is Dharananda and Mukundas is Dhruvananda. They were born into a family of artisans in Malava. Their father lived in Ujjain with the Muslim ruler. One day their father just stood up and said he had had enough, and he went home where he left his body after a few days. The boys were only about 11 years old, and the family was suffering a lack of funds, so they left home and went to Varanasi. There they earned a lot of money. They were on their way home when, about 2 miles from Varanasi, a snake came out and bit Mukundas before going back into its hole. The poison spread into his body, so Dinkar Das carried him back to Varanasi. There they tried everything, but they could not combat the poison. Dinkar Das began to cry very loudly. At that time, Sri Acharyaji was staying in Varanasi at the home of Sri Purushottam Das. Krishna Das came out to the market to fetch something and saw him crying. He was a great devotee and his heart was soft, so he asked Dinkar Das what was up, why he was so sad. Dinkar Das replied, first we had to come here to earn some funds for our home, and then a snake has bitten my brother, and I have tried everything but can't get rid of the poison. Now we just want to die in the river Ganga. There is nothing left for us at home. Krishnadas felt sorry for them, and perceiving them to be divine souls, gave Dinkar Das the foot dust of Sri Acharyaji that he had in his pocket. They put it into some water and gave it to Mukundas to drink. At that very moment he recovered and sat up, rid of the poison. His mind was also completely purified by the foot dust. Mukundas said, Jai Shri Krishna to Krishnadas and then bowed low to him. They asked Krishnadas where Sri Acharyaji was residing, but first Krishnadas asked Mukundas why he had bowed to him. Sri Acharyaji, who sits in your heart, had blessed us. Otherwise we have no idea about him, and we were just drowning in the ocean of worldliness. We didn't even know you, but now you have blessed us. Therefore is nothing wrong in bowing low to a great devotee. Krishnadas asked them not to tell Sri Acharyaji that he had healed Mukundas with the foot dust, otherwise he will be angry with me. And don't tell anyone in the village, or they will give me too much botheration, and then we will not even be able to stay here. Mukundas asked Krishnadas to tell him where he could find Sri Acharyaji. Krishnadas told him he was at Seth Purushottam Das's house. Krishnadas then went off to attend to his tasks, and Mukundas suggested to his brother that they go to Sri Acharyaji and take his shelter. When Dinkar Das asked him who Sri Acharyaji was, he replied that he was the Lord himself, for just by the touch of his foot dust he had gained the ultimate knowledge. When you take his foot dust, you will recognize his true identity. Let's go quickly now. The two brothers went off to Sri Acharyaji, and after bowing to him, asked to be accepted as his disciples. We are most offensive beings and are roaming about in the world of joy and grief. Please uplift us. Sri Acharyaji replied, You are artisans. How will you manage to follow the ways of this path of grace? Mukundas said, With your grace everything is possible. The lowest of beings can achieve everything with your grace, or the highest of castes can do nothing without your grace. Please accept us as your disciples and thus grant us the greatest bliss. Hearing this, Sri Acharyaji became very happy and said he knew this was the doing of Krishnadas. When the two of them had bathed, he initiated them both with the Lord's name and Brahma-Samban. They stayed some days with Sri Acharyaji, who taught them all the ways of the path of grace. They then requested his permission to go home, but that they needed to know what they should now do. Sri Acharyaji wrote out the Brahma-Samban Mantra and told them to serve this document. They were to offer everything they would, eat or drink to it first. The two brothers then returned to Malava. They kept their offerings separate from their wives' cooking, for the latter were not divine souls and had no desire to serve the Lord. When Mukundas took the foot dust of Sri Acharyaji, he was blessed with the perfect knowledge of all the scriptures. Part 1. Mukundas began to write very beautiful poetry in which he described Sri Acharyaji, Sri Gosaiji and Sri Thakurji as all being of one essence. He also composed a book called the Mukunda Sagar in Braj Bhasha. Therein he explained the meaning of the whole of the 12 books of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Mukundas got an employment in Ujjain. All the priests and pandits of that town came to meet him. They all wanted to recite the Bhagavatam to him. Mukundas told them that he had no time to listen, but that he would when he had time. His meaning was that after listening to Sri Acharyaji's explanation of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Subodhaniji, he had no time or desire left to listen to anything else. After a few days, that same Brahmin came to Mukundas. This is part 1 continued. After a few days, that same Brahmin came to Mukundas and again said he would come and recite the Srimad Bhagavatam to him. In this way, many days passed. One day, Mukundas was playing Chaupad, a board game, and the Pandit saw him. The Pandit decided to say something about this. So when Mukundas's game was over, he said, May I recite the Srimad Bhagavatam to you now? Mukundas said that he would listen when he had time. The Pandit retorted that if he had the time to play Chaupad, then why did he not have the time to listen to his recitation? Mukundas thought to himself, he has asked a loaded question, and so I must give him a suitable answer. He asked the Pandit, Have you heard my Srimad Bhagavatam? The Pandit asked how his Sri Bhagavat Ji was different, and that he should kindly start the recitation. Mukundas said that he would when he had time. That Brahmin was not following the path of grace, and that is why Mukundas did not want to listen to his discourse. Bhav Prakash. In the account of the 64 faults to be avoided by Vaishnavas, it is written, "You will be born 3 times in the body of a tree if you hear the Srimad Bhagavatam from a non-devotee. It is offensive for a Vaishnava of the path of grace to listen to the Srimad Bhagavatam recited by a person of another path. This statement can generate some doubt in an embodied soul's mind. After all, everyone is entitled to hear the Lord's name. Anyone of any caste or creed can be liberated by such hearing and reciting. Even Ajamil was able to be liberated by the Lord's name, and this story is famous throughout the whole world. So then why, in the path of grace, is it considered to be wrong to listen to the Srimad Bhagavatam recited by someone on another path? How can it have a bad effect to hear the Lord's stories? This is a very deep subject. The explanation is that in the path of lawful limitations, the goal is liberation, whilst in the path of grace, the only goal is pure devotion and service in devotion. This type of devotion comes about through surrender to the teachings of Sri Acharyaji. So then what is the difference between shelter and misplaced shelter? The heart is a lotus flower, within which true faithful shelter, love, and all righteous behaviour form this place where the beloved Lord takes his seat. Shelter is perfect when the type of bliss associated with Sri Acharyaji's principles enters that heart. Then the heart can be filled with the bliss of the essence of the Lord's love. When the eyes see something beautiful, then the heart is happy. Here the joy comes exclusively from the sight of Sri Mataji, Sri Acharyaji's dear beloved Lord. Experiencing joy in any other form or in worldly or scriptural realms is misplaced shelter. The eyes, when they wander to other appearances, become most impure. The sentiments of joy and sorrow can also enter the heart through what the ears listen to. Listening to tainted nonsense from certain mouths can also spoil the mood of love in the heart. One should only listen to those whose whole mood is that of servitude and humility. This type of humility is found in Sri Acharyaji and devotees of his path of grace. One should listen only to their words so that the heart gets filled with and fixed into the essence of divine love. Giving heartfelt attention to the words of those with other intentions is misplaced shelter. Their lies should not be allowed to affect the heart dedicated to the grace-filled path. One can listen to their words but must maintain an aloof spirit. One should keep the mind fixed on the 8-syllable mantra. Thus, the main principle is not to indulge in the words spoken by those with other intentions. Voices can make a meeting of the minds. Silence is the best practice. And therefore one should not ask about or talk about principles of one's religious practice with anyone else. None of one's senses should find satisfaction in joy or in anything unrelated to the path of grace. This degree of shelter is the best path towards the perfection of surrender. In this story we see how Mukundas' shelter in Sri Acharyaji was perfected. Actually, it would not have mattered if he heard the other pundits' words, but for those who might follow him, that could become an obstacle in their devotion. Until such a stage is reached, it is better not to listen to the speech of those on other paths, because the mind can be gradually attracted in an opposite direction. Therefore, they should only hear and speak of Sri Acharyaji's instructions. Mukundas ji played chopar when anyone from another path came to discuss religious matters with him. They would then turn back in disappointment. On the excuse of the board game, he never had to say anything distasteful to them. They thought he was attached to chopar, and this is how he kept his mind fixed perfectly on the path of grace. So, Aaj ke Anand ki jai. Today's bliss is great grace. Here we pause until tomorrow, when we will continue with the story of Dinkar Das and Mukundas. Jai Shri Radhe. Jai Shri Krishna. Shri Vallabhadis ki jai. Jai Jai Shri Radhe.